What if a strip of land just 65 miles wide could pull the world's largest military alliance into war? Not a city, not a capital, just a corridor between Poland and Lithuania. This isn't hypothetical. It's a chain reaction decades in the making. How did one border zone become NATO's most dangerous pressure point? The answer isn't the geography, it's what's been quietly positioned on both sides of it. North of the Polish town of Suwałki, the landscape tightens into a corridor just 65 kilometers wide at its narrowest. Here, a single highway, European Route E67, known as the Via Baltica, threads between Kaliningrad's border to the west and Belarus to the east. This is not an open plain, but a patchwork of forests, lakes, and soft ground that turns to mud each spring and autumn. The Via Baltica, reinforced as Poland's S61 expressway, carries the bulk of NATO's northbound road traffic, but its Lithuanian continuation, the A5, narrows to 2 lanes and slows to a crawl behind heavy trucks. Parallel to the highway runs the only standard-gauge rail line connecting Poland to Lithuania and onward to the Baltic capitals. North of Suwałki, that line is single-track and non-electrified, with a key steel girder bridge spanning the Niemen River at Budzisko Kybartai. All NATO heavy freight, tanks, fuel, ammunition must funnel across this bridge. Any disruption here forces a detour of hundreds of kilometers around, or a shift to air and sea routes already under threat from modern missile systems. Secondary roads in the corridor are often unpaved, winding through dense pine and oak stands or skirting the edges of more than 150 lakes. During the spring thaw, these routes become impassable for heavy vehicles, concentrating all movement onto the expressway and the rail line. The terrain's natural bottlenecks mean that a single accident, bridge failure, or targeted attack could freeze the entire flow of reinforcements north. This logistical fragility is why military planners scrutinize every kilometer of the Suwałki Gap. The corridor's width is measured not just in miles, but in the number of reliable lanes and bridges that can be kept open under pressure. In a crisis, the difference between a functioning highway and a blocked rail span could determine whether the Baltic states remain connected to the rest of NATO or are left isolated on Europe's northeastern edge. The Suwałki corridor's strategic weight is rooted in a century of shifting borders and military priorities. In April 1945, Soviet troops stormed Königsberg, ending centuries of German control and redrawing the map of northern Europe. The city was renamed Kaliningrad, and by 1946, Moscow had formally annexed the entire region into the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. This move not only gave the Soviet Union a Baltic coastline, it also established a militarized outpost wedged between Poland and Lithuania. During the Cold War, Kaliningrad bristled with airfields, coastal artillery, and missile brigades, assets designed to deny NATO access to the Baltic Sea and the land routes beyond. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 brought independence to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. But geography left these states with a single, narrow land link to the rest of Europe, the Suwałki Corridor. When the three Baltics joined NATO in March 2004, the alliance's eastern boundary snapped into place along this vulnerable strip. A NATO press release from that year stated, "The security of the Suwałki Gap, the narrow land bridge linking the Baltics to the rest of the alliance, will be a priority." For Baltic officials, the change was immediate and profound. As Kęstutis Sulevicius, Lithuania's Deputy Minister of National Defense, explained in 2023, when we joined NATO in 2004, the calculus changed overnight. Any threat to the Suwałki Gap now means a direct threat to the freedom of movement of our troops and civilians. This corridor's importance today is not just a legacy of old borders. It is the product of Soviet-era militarization, Cold War doctrines, and the hard reality that the only overland route for NATO reinforcements runs through a zone still shaped by its 20th century past. Each step, from the Soviet seizure of Königsberg to the Baltic states' NATO accession, has layered new risks onto this short stretch of frontier, turning it into one of Europe's most scrutinized flashpoints. Kaliningrad's military arsenal transforms the Suwałki corridor from a narrow borderland into a zone of operational denial. The S-400 Triumph surface-to-air missile system, Stationed at sites like Gvardisk and Baltic, projects a 400-kilometer air defense envelope. This reach places not just the Suwałki Gap, but most of Poland's northeast and the Baltic Sea's main air corridors under persistent threat. Alongside, Iskander-M short-range ballistic missile batteries with a 500-kilometer range are positioned to strike road and rail junctions, airfields, and logistics hubs across the region. A single Iskander salvo could neutralize the key rail bridge at Budzisko or disrupt convoys on the S61 expressway within minutes of launch. Coastal defense is reinforced by K300P bastion systems, which can target ships up to 200 kilometers offshore, enough to contest NATO resupply routes through the Gdansk Bay. Early warning and targeting are enabled by the Tall King radar network, with a detection range of up to 500 kilometers, feeding data to both missile and air defense units. Analysts describe this as a layered A2AD shield. Each system covers the others, complicating any attempt to move reinforcements through the corridor or establish air superiority overhead. As Agnia Grigas, an independent security analyst, notes, Kaliningrad's denial complex is designed to buy time, hours or days, by slowing or blocking NATO's response at the very outset of a crisis. The operational effect is clear. Every movement through the Suwałki Gap is mapped, measured, and potentially targeted from the west. The next layer of complexity comes from the east, as Belarus's military posture increasingly integrates with Russia's, further tightening the corridor. Since 2020, Belarus has become more than just a neighbor to the Suwałki corridor. It now acts as an eastern multiplier on the region's pressure. Joint Russian-Belarusian military headquarters, established in 2024, coordinate exercises and planning across both sides of the border. These annual drills, including the large-scale Zapad and Spring Storm maneuvers, have grown in size and complexity, regularly rehearsing rapid deployments near the Lithuanian and Polish frontiers. The 2025 exercise brought 12,000 Russian and Belarusian troops to western Belarus, simulating a thrust toward the corridor itself. This integration is matched by infrastructure upgrades. Belarus has extended and reinforced the Minsk-Brest railway corridor to handle heavy armored trains, while satellite imagery confirms the lengthening of runways at Bobruisk and Lida airfields. Since 2022, Russian Il-76 transport aircraft have rotated through Lida, providing the means to airlift troops and equipment close to the border on short notice. Air defense has also deepened. A full S-Chasen forward regiment now operates out of Hansawice, just 100 kilometers from Polish territory. The result is a tightening of the corridor from the east. Analysts warn that these upgrades reduce NATO's reaction time in a crisis, as forces and logistics can be surged toward the gap far more quickly than before. With Belarus acting as a forward operating base for Russian units, the Suwałki corridor faces a pincer threat, pressure that can be applied almost simultaneously from both Kaliningrad and Belarus. This dual-axis risk is a central concern in NATO's current posture planning, complicating efforts to guarantee rapid reinforcement of the Baltic states if the corridor comes under threat. NATO's answer to the Suwałki dilemma is not just hardware, but posture. Since 2017, the alliance has stationed enhanced forward presence battle groups in Poland and all three Baltic states. These multinational units, led by the US, Germany, Canada, and the UK, rotate armor, infantry, and air defense elements on a persistent basis. Their purpose is clear: to serve as a visible tripwire, making any attack on the corridor a direct engagement with the alliance as a whole. But deterrence is only as credible as reinforcement. NATO's Defender Europe exercises have moved tens of thousands of troops and thousands of vehicles across the continent, stress testing the very road and rail arteries that funnel through the Suwałki Gap. These drills expose hard truths. Even under peacetime conditions, bottlenecks at border crossings, bridge weight limits, and customs checks can slow a brigade's transit by hours or days. In 2025, a senior NATO mobility planner summed up the challenge. Our ability to reinforce the Baltics rests on a single corridor. If that link is broken, we face a race between our logistics and the adversary's denial systems. The alliance has invested in infrastructure upgrades and streamlined legal procedures, but the underlying vulnerability remains. If the Suwałki corridor is disrupted, rapid reinforcement could stall, leaving the Baltic states exposed and the credibility of NATO's collective defense tested in real time. A crisis in the Suwałki corridor may not begin with tanks or missiles, but with something quieter, a rail signaling hack that halts all northbound freight, or a bridge on the Via Baltica brought down by hidden explosives. Military analysts highlight these as plausible spark points. A cyber attack on the Polish-Lithuanian railway could freeze the only direct route for heavy NATO reinforcements, while sabotage of the Niemen River rail bridge would force convoys onto slower, riskier paths. Even a staged border clash, amplified by disinformation, could create confusion about who fired first, stalling political decision-making as the corridor closes. Each scenario exploits the region's narrow infrastructure and the difficulty of rapid verification. The effect is immediate. A single disruption can block the movement of troops and equipment, turning a logistical vulnerability into a strategic dilemma. Decision-makers would then face a hard choice: wait for clarity or act under uncertainty, knowing that every hour lost increases the risk of escalation. Inside NATO headquarters, the question lands with full force. Does a disrupted Suwałki corridor count as an armed attack under Article 5? Analysts point to the consequences of a 4-missile Iskander salvo. In wargames, such a strike shuts down the main rail hub for up to 48 hours, enough to freeze reinforcement, strand battle groups, and force leaders to act before all facts are known. The challenge isn't just physical damage, it is the overlapping denial zones from Kaliningrad's S-400s and Belarusian missile batteries. Each system covers the same ground, creating a patchwork where any movement risks triggering a wider clash. As officials debate, every hour lost raises the odds that a limited disruption could spiral into a crisis with no clear off-ramp. The corridor's vulnerability becomes a test of alliance resolve, with no guarantee of a safe outcome. Right now, NATO's security hinges on a corridor no wider than a morning commute. As military postures harden and alliances deepen, the Suwałki Gap remains Europe's most exposed link. Here, geography and deterrence collide, showing how even the smallest borders can decide the fate of continents. Share your perspective below.